Hello, my friend. Today I will tell you another long-forgotten legend. Close your eyes and let the magic transport you to Middle-earth. Our journey begins.
The wind swept over the fields of the Westfold, carrying with it the scent of ash and iron. Smoke still curled from the distant forges of Isengard, though Saruman's power had been broken and his hosts scattered. Upon the rolling plains rode Aragorn, son of Arathorn, his grey cloak stirring like a shadow against the morning sun. At his side ran Gimli the dwarf, stout and grim, and Legolas the elf, light-footed and silent as mist. They rode not in triumph, for war still smoldered in the east, but in duty, seeking those who had fled Helm's Deep with dark purpose. That day they found the first sign of what was yet to come. A rider of Rohan lay fallen near a dried stream bed, his spear shattered beside him. Aragorn knelt, pressing a hand to the man's breast, but the light had already gone from his eyes. Upon his lips trembled a final word, faint as a sigh. Flame. Aragorn leaned closer. What flame, my friend? The dying man's fingers twitched, pointing toward the north. Flame. Of death, he whispered, and then he was still. Legolas's keen eyes turned to the horizon. Uruk-hai passed here, he said softly. 6, perhaps 7, bearing heavy burdens. Their tracks turned northward, away from Isengard. Gimli frowned. Strange choice for runaways. The north offers no safety, only the Vold, barren and haunted. Aragorn's gaze darkened. He took up the fallen rider's sword and laid it across the man's chest. Then that is where we go. If these Uruks flee north, it is not to hide. There is something they seek or carry. They set out without rest. The day grew harsh, the sky a cold blue arch above the wild plains. The land bore the scars of battle, trampled fields, scattered armor, the bones of men and orcs alike. Yet the tracks ahead remained clear, broad, deep footprints burned into the soil as though scorched by heat. When night fell, they camped beneath a low ridge. The moon rose pale over the grasslands, and Legolas stood watch, his eyes gleaming like silver as he gazed toward the north. Do you sense it? He murmured when Aragorn came beside him. The air is strange, thick with some foul breath. The earth itself seems wounded. Aragorn nodded. I have felt it since we found the rider. There is fire in this trail, not of the hearth, but of some darker forge. The next morning they came upon a small hollow, ringed by stones, blackened with soot. In its center lay a half-buried chest of iron, its lid torn open. Inside, amid ashes, gleamed a shard of something like obsidian, black, sharp-edged, and faintly glowing from within. Gimli knelt beside it. What devilry is this? Aragorn reached for the fragment, but even before his hand drew near, heat rolled from it like breath from a furnace. He drew back at once. Not devilry, he said quietly. Craft. This was forged by Saruman's order in the pits beneath Orthanc. I have heard whispers of such things. Steel tempered not in water, but in the fires of sorcery. Legolas's brow furrowed. Then the rider spoke true. The flame of death is no mere name, it is a weapon. A weapon meant for war, yet to come, said Aragorn. He rose, his eyes fixed upon the faint northern hills. If the Uruks carry the blade whole, it must not reach Mordor, for if Sauron's hand should grasp such fire, none in Middle-earth could withstand it. Thus began the hunt. For 2 days and nights they pursued the trail through the high grass and rocky folds of the Vold. The land grew lonelier with every mile, the wind colder, and shadows stretched long beneath the dying sun. At last, on the third evening, Legolas raised his hand. "There," he whispered, "smoke, far ahead, where the land dips into the old barrows." They moved silently, drawing close as twilight deepened. From a ridge, they looked down upon a hollow lit by the flicker of fire. A score of Uruk-hai squatted about the flames, their black armor dented and blood-stained. At their center stood a great figure, broad and cruel-faced, bearing a sword whose edge shimmered red in the dark. "Their captain," said Gimli. "He has the flame." The light of the sword was strange, no ordinary fire, but a glow like molten stone. When the Uruk lifted it, the very air seemed to waver. The others drew back as though fearing its touch. Aragorn watched in silence, his jaw tight. "That is no common blade. See how it drinks the light? It is as if it feeds upon life itself." "What shall we do?" asked Legolas. "We are three, and they are many." "We wait," said Aragorn. "At dawn they will move, then we follow. They will lead us to their purpose, and when we know it, we strike." They lay hidden until the night grew deep. The Uruks feasted, their laughter harsh in the still air. The captain raised the burning sword, shouting words in the black tongue that sent a shiver through the ground. Aragorn's hand closed on the hilt of Andúril. The blade whispered softly in its sheath, eager for light. "Flame against flame," he murmured. "So be it. I am not afraid of fire." But in the flickering glow below, the flame of death flared brighter, and its red light seemed to reach toward the ridge where they lay, as though it already knew his name. At dawn, a pale mist hung over the Vold. The land was quiet, save for the whisper of wind over the grass. Aragorn stood upon the ridge, watching as the Uruk-hai broke camp below. Their captain, Musgul the Red-Eyed, moved among them, his heavy armor black as pitch. Upon his back hung the sword, the flame of death, wrapped in coarse cloth that smoked faintly in the cool air. Wherever he stepped, the ground seemed to darken. "They marched north," said Legolas softly, "not toward Isengard nor Mordor." "What lies that way?" Aragorn's gaze followed the shadowed trail that wound between distant hills. "The ruins of Calanost," he said. "An old watchtower from the days of Gondor's pride. It was abandoned centuries ago. There are vaults beneath its stones, storehouses of weapons and relics left to dust." Gimli's eyes narrowed. "And the Uruks seek to rouse that dust to life." "Aye," Aragorn answered grimly. "They mean to forge something new from what lies buried." Without another word, the three set forth, following the Uruk band at a distance. The sun climbed and fell, and still they tracked their prey, through wild stretches where no bird sang. Once they came upon a stream whose waters ran warm as blood. Strange vapors coiled above it, and the smell of iron stung their throats. "Isengard's taint runs deep," said Legolas. "Even the rivers remember its fire." As evening drew near, the Uruks halted to rest at the edge of a hollow. Aragorn and his companions crept close, taking cover among twisted thorn trees. There, in the dim light, they saw the captain unwrap the sword. The flame of death glimmered in his hands. The metal was black, but its surface pulsed with veins of crimson light that ran like molten rivers. Its heat shimmered in the air, and when Musgul raised it, the Uruks lowered their heads as though in worship. "By the pits of Angband," Gimli muttered, "that thing should not be." "It is not of the Dark Lord's making," Aragorn said, eyes fixed on the weapon. "This is Saruman's pride, the craft of one who thought himself a god of fire, but pride such as his never dies easily. The blade bears his mark still. Legolas laid a hand on Aragorn's shoulder. Then let us strike now while they rest. We are swift and silent. We can scatter them before they know we are near. Aragorn shook his head. Not yet. The flame hungers. If we meet it in haste, it will devour us all. I must know how they mean to use it. So they waited as the Uruks rose again and marched on beneath a sky streaked with dying gold. Night came early. Clouds gathered and thunder murmured beyond the northern hills. By the time the company reached the ruins of Calanost, a storm was brewing. The tower itself was little more than a broken crown of stone, its walls toppled and swallowed by grass. Yet beneath it, through cracks and collapsed passages, the Uruks descended with torches and the burning sword to light their way. Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli followed them down the winding stairs. The air below was heavy with dust and old sorrow. They passed through halls whose walls bore carvings of white trees and stars long faded. Rusted weapons hung in niches and fragments of armor gleamed like ghosts in the torchlight. Then they heard the hammering. In a vast chamber at the tower's heart stood a forge, ancient and cold, until now. The Uruks had kindled it with oil and pitch, and from its mouth spilled a red glare that danced upon the stone. Musgul stood before it, chanting in the harsh tongue of Mordor. He thrust the flame of death into the fire, and sparks burst forth, filling the air with a shriek like steel tearing. Aragorn felt the heat wash over him, burning against his skin even from afar. He seeks to awaken it, he said in a low voice. He means to feed the sword with new life. Legolas drew an arrow, then let him taste death instead. But before he could loose, a cry rang through the chamber. One of the Uruks had caught sight of them. At once, the cavern erupted into chaos. Now, Aragorn shouted. They leapt from the shadows, steel flashing, and Duril blazed white, a star against the dark, while Gimli's axe cleaved through armor and bone. Legolas's arrows flew swift and deadly, felling foes before they reached the forge. Yet even as they fought, Musgul wrenched the burning sword from the fire and turned upon Aragorn. The two met in a clash that shook the hall. The flame of death struck against Andúril, and sparks like red and silver rain flew between them. The heat of the black blade scorched Aragorn's hands, and the stench of burning filled the air. "Dúnadan," roared Musgul. "You cannot slay what is born of fire." Aragorn's answer was a cry of fury. He drove the Uruk back step by step until they stood beside the roaring forge. Then Musgul feinted, turning the cursed sword's edge low. It bit through Aragorn's sleeve, searing flesh to the bone. He staggered, the pain blinding. The blade's light flared, feeding upon his blood. Legolas's arrow struck Musgul's shoulder, but the Uruk only laughed, a deep, hollow sound. "The flame knows its master," he roared, and with a sweep of his arm he shattered one of the forge's supports. Stone fell, smoke billowed. "Aragorn!" cried Gimli. He dragged him from the falling debris, even as the Uruks began to flee into the tunnels. The sound of their retreat echoed through the dark. When at last the noise faded, Legolas knelt beside Aragorn. The wound upon his arm still smoked, and strange marks, black and crimson, crept outward from it. "This is no ordinary burn," the elf said softly. "The sword's fire lingers in your blood." Aragorn gritted his teeth. "Then it shall linger until I see it quenched. The flame of death will burn no more." He tried to stand, swaying slightly, but his eyes were fierce and unyielding. "They go to finish what they began," he said. to forge a new army beneath the shadow of Rohan's borders. We must ride before them." Gimli frowned. "And what of your wound?" "It will wait," Aragorn replied. "The land cannot." Outside, the storm broke in full. Lightning split the sky, casting the plains in flashes of ghostly white. The companions mounted their horses, rain lashing their faces as they turned north once more. Behind them, the forge still glowed faintly in the ruins, like an eye that refused to die. And in the darkness, somewhere ahead, the flame of death burned on, hungry, waiting, and bound to the man who now swore to destroy it. The storm did not relent through the night. Thunder rolled across the wold like the march of drums, and rain lashed the land until it ran with rivers of mud. Yet through that tempest rode Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli, bent low over their steeds as lightning flared above them. Their cloaks were heavy with water, their faces drawn, but none spoke. For the flame of death still burned ahead of them, and the wound upon Aragorn's arm pulsed like a living coal beneath his sleeve. By dawn the storm had passed. A pale, cold light crept across the sky, revealing a land stripped bare by wind and water. The trail of the Uruks was plain, a deep furrow through the sodden earth. They had made haste in the night, leaving behind broken weapons, torn cloth, and once the corpse of one of their own, blackened and burnt, as if by inner fire. Legolas dismounted to examine it. The body lay twisted, its armor half melted. "He touched the blade," the elf murmured. "Even its master cannot keep it fed without cost." Aragorn's brow furrowed. "Then the flame consumes all that wields it, as it consumed its maker's will. Saruman built his power upon pride and fire. Now his servants reap both." "Small comfort," growled Gimli. "That thing will burn a world before it burns itself." They pressed on northward, and the land began to change. The wide grass of Rohan gave way to rough hills, their slopes cut with ravines and broken stone. Once, these lands had been watched by Gondor's men, but now only the wind kept company with their ruins. The Uruk's trail led into one such valley, a narrow cleft shadowed by leaning cliffs. When they reached its mouth, Aragorn raised a hand. "They passed here only hours ago," he said, "and they are burdened. The flame slows them." Gimli tightened his grip on his axe. "Then perhaps we'll find them resting and end this chase with steel." But Legolas shook his head. "No, there is something else here. The air is foul." Indeed, as they entered the gorge, a strange stench filled the air, sharp and sulphurous, like the breath of burning stone. The walls glistened with a dark slime, and fissures in the ground exhaled pale smoke. "The earth burns beneath," said Aragorn softly. "An old wound of the world from the making of the mountains. The Uruks have chosen their path well. Fire feeds upon fire." Deeper they went until the sound of hammers echoed faintly through the rock. The gorge widened into a hollow where an ancient ruin stood, perhaps once a way station for Gondor's riders. Now the Uruks had turned it into a forge. Smoke rose in greasy plumes, and the glow of molten metal shone through cracks and at the stone. They dismounted and crept forward. From behind a shattered wall, they saw Musgul again, his hulking form outlined by the red glare. Around him labored the remnants of his host, stoking the fires and hammering at blades that twisted in the heat. The flame of death lay upon an anvil before him, its light pulsing with a heartbeat of its own. "He means to awaken it fully," whispered Legolas. "The sword draws power from the fires of the earth." Aragorn's face was pale beneath the grime of battle. "If he succeeds, its flame will spread beyond this valley, It will call to every fell spirit that lingers in Middle-earth. He clenched his fist. This ends here. They moved as one, Legolas circling to the left, Gimli to the right, Aragorn forward through the ruins. The Uruks, intent upon their work, did not see the shadow of death approach until it was upon them. The first fell to Legolas's arrows, swift and silent. The second met Gimli's axe in a spray of sparks. Then Aragorn leapt from behind the forge's wreck, and Andúral's white fire sang through the gloom. The Uruks cried out, scrambling for weapons, but they were no match for the fury that fell upon them. Musgul turned, roaring. He seized the flame of death and swung it. In a blazing arc that split the forge's stone floor, the blast threw sparks and ash into the air, and for a heartbeat, light and darkness battled across the chamber. Aragorn met him blade for blade. Andúral flared with a light pure and cold, while the flame burned red as blood. The heat was unbearable. It seared the air, and sweat streamed from Aragorn's brow. Each strike sent shudders through his wounded arm, but he fought on, driven by will alone. "Your time is over, servant of Saruman," Aragorn cried. "His fire burns still," bellowed Musgul, parrying a blow that sent embers whirling. "You cannot quench the flame of the White Hand." Their swords locked. The flame pressed against Andúral's shining edge, hissing as if alive. Smoke curled from Aragorn's grip, but he did not yield. Instead, with a sudden twist, he drove Musgul backward into the forge. The Uruks staggered, the heat rising around him in waves. The sword's light flared wildly, licking at his armor, his flesh. Still he fought, his eyes blazing with madness. Then Gimli's axe found his side, and he stumbled. Legolas's final arrow pierced his throat. Musgul fell against the anvil, the flame clutched in both hands. For a moment all was still. Then the sword screamed. A sound like tearing metal and fire made voice. Its glow burst outward, engulfing its master. Musgul's form blazed white-hot, and in a breath he was gone, consumed utterly, leaving only blackened armor and a sword that still burned without fuel. Aragorn stood over it, breathing hard. The wound in his arm throbbed with every heartbeat, the mark spreading further beneath his skin. He looked upon the weapon and saw in its fire not victory but peril, a hunger unending. Legolas approached, shielding his eyes. "We must destroy it now, while its power is unbound." "I," said Gimli, "cast it into the heart of the forge that birthed it." But Aragorn shook his head slowly. "No, not this forge. Its fires are too near the surface. The sword's death would wake the fire beneath the valley and burn all Rohan to ash. It must be carried elsewhere, to a place where its flame will meet only cold stone and silence." He wrapped the sword in a torn cloak, though the fabric smoldered at once. "We ride to the White Mountains. There, beneath the snows, its fire will die." And so while the forge burned itself to ruin behind them, the three companions mounted and rode southward. The wind howled through the ravine, bearing with it the last echoes of Musgul's scream. Yet though the flame of death was bound and hidden, its light glimmered faintly through the cloth, and Aragorn, riding at the front, felt its heat against his side, felt too the answering fire in his own blood where the cursed blade had marked him. He said nothing, but as the mountains loomed ahead, white and cold against the darkening sky, he knew that this battle was not yet done. The wind from the White Mountains cut sharp and cold, carrying the scent of snow and stone. Days had passed since the fall of Musgul and his host, yet the land bore the scars of their passing, ashes scattered over the fields, blackened pools where fire had kissed the earth. Aragorn rode at the head of his companions, his face pale beneath the shadow of his hood. Beneath his cloak, the wrapped sword pulsed faintly as though a heartbeat throbbed within the shroud of cloth. They had left the Vold behind, riding westward through the borderlands of Rohan, where scattered villages huddled in the shelter of rocky hills. None dared approach them, for even veiled, the flame's presence brought unease. Horses shied from it, birds fled at their passing, and fires guttered in hearths as they neared. On the third night, they made camp beside a frozen stream. Legolas tended to the horses while Gimli gathered wood. Aragorn sat apart, his hand pressed to his arm, where the cursed wound still burned. He could feel the heat of the sword through its wrappings, seeping into his bones. "You should rest," said Legolas softly, as he returned to the fire. "Your strength wanes. That wound festers with dark craft." Aragorn looked up, his eyes shadowed. "I have borne worse." "Not such as this," the elf replied. "This is no wound of blade or arrow. It is fire bound to flesh." Gimli set down his bundle of wood and grunted. "We cannot let it take you, lad. If that cursed thing gnaws at your life, we'll find a way to break its hold." Aragorn managed a faint smile. "The cure lies in its ruin. Once the flame is quenched, its mark will fade. Until then, I must endure." They ate little that night, for no food seemed to satisfy them. Beneath the watch of that unseen fire, the stars burned cold above, and in the silence between gusts of wind, Aragorn thought he could hear the sword whisper, not in words, but in a rhythm, a steady pulse that drew his thoughts toward it. "I am flame. I am life." He turned away from the bundle of cloth and stared into the darkness until sleep came. Before dawn, Legolas shook him awake. "Riders approach," he said. "They bear the banners of the Mark." Within the hour, a small company of Rohirrim appeared, their spears gleaming with frost. At their head rode Éomer, tall and golden-haired, his armor still bearing the scars of Helm's Deep. His eyes lit with relief at the sight of Aragorn, yet darkened as they fell upon the wrapped bundle beside him. "Strider," Éomer said, dismounting, "we heard tidings of fire in the north. Some say a new forge of Isengard was found, others that a demon walks the wold. What truth lies behind these whispers?" Aragorn rose to meet him. "The whispers hold more truth than I would wish. Saruman's servants forged a weapon, a sword of flame and death. It was taken from them, but it is not yet safe." He gestured toward the bundle. "Here lies that which they made." Even through the wrapping, Éomer felt its heat. He drew back, eyes wide. "By the Valar, what fire is this?" "One that must never be kindled again," said Aragorn. "I go now to cast it into the heart of stone, beneath the White Mountains, where no forge shall ever feed it again." Éomer studied him for a long moment. "You are wounded?" "It matters not," Aragorn said simply, "so long as my hand can hold Andúril." The Marshal of the Mark nodded slowly. "Then you shall not ride alone. The Riddermark owes you more than gratitude, Aragorn of the North. I will send men to guide you to the mountain passes." So it was that 5 riders joined their company, and together they rode toward the feet of the White Mountains. The days grew bitterly cold, the wind keen as knives. Snow began to fall, first as dust, then in heavy veils that hid the world. They passed through narrow defiles where the air was thin and the peaks loomed like white sentinels above. The flame of death burned hotter with each mile. The wrappings were charred now, though Aragorn renewed them nightly. At times, strange lights flickered through the cloth, shapes that writhed like tongues of living fire. One night when all slept but he, Aragorn rose and walked apart. He set the sword upon a flat stone and unwrapped it. The air around it shimmered, and the heat struck him like the breath of a forge. The blade glowed crimson, its edges dark as shadow. "Why do you call to me?" he murmured. "Would you have me your keeper? Or your kindling?" For an instant he saw faces in the fire, Uruks screaming, Saruman's pale eyes burning with madness, and beyond them something vast and formless, watching through the flame. He drew back sharply, rewrapping the blade with trembling hands. When dawn came, they began their ascent into the high passes. The snow lay thick, and their mounts struggled for footing. At noon, they came upon a cleft in the mountainside where a narrow cave opened, its mouth rimed with frost. "This is the place," said Aragorn. His voice was hoarse, yet filled with purpose. "The cold runs deep here. No fire can survive within." They entered the cave, torches flickering in the dark. The walls glittered with veins of ice, and the air hung still, heavy with the chill of ages. Deep within, the passage widened into a hollow chamber. There, Aragorn laid down the wrapped sword. Upon a slab of stone, Legolas raised his torch high. "Will you cast it here?" "Yes," Aragorn said. "The stone will hold its fire until it dies. None shall disturb it." He placed his hand upon the sword one last time. Its heat burned through the wrappings, searing his palm. "Go now into darkness," he whispered. "May no hand ever wake thee again." With that, he pushed the blade from the stone ledge. It fell into a crevice below, and a burst of red light filled the chamber. The flame flared once, twice, and was gone. The air turned cold again, and the mountain was silent. For a long time, none spoke. Then Gimli exhaled slowly. "It is done." But Aragorn swayed, his knees buckling. Legolas caught him before he fell. The mark upon his arm, once burning red, had turned black, the veins around it dark as ink. "He gave his strength to break the bond," said Legolas. "The fire within him is spent." Elmer knelt beside him, pressing a hand to his shoulder. "Hold fast, my friend. The shadow is gone." Aragorn's eyes flickered open, faint but clear. "Not gone," he whispered, "only sleeping. Fire does not die. It waits." Then he closed his eyes, and for a while there was no sound but the wind moving through the stones. When they emerged from the cave, the storm had passed. The sky above was clear, and sunlight crowned the peaks in gold. Aragorn rode in silence, his arm bound, his strength slowly returning. And though none spoke of it again, each man who had stood in that frozen cave carried with him a memory of the light that had flared there, a light red as blood and fierce as wrath, now buried deep beneath the mountains of the world. For many days they rode eastward once more, leaving the cold tomb of the mountains behind. The sun returned to them, gentle at first, then fierce, as if the world itself rejoiced that the flame of death no longer burned upon its surface. Yet though the air grew warmer, a chill still clung to Aragorn's spirit. His wound, though bound and cleaned by Legolas's careful hands, did not fade. The skin was marked with dark veins that pulsed faintly, and when he closed his eyes, he still saw red fire flicker behind his lids. They came at last to the green plains of Rohan. The grass swayed beneath the wind, and far off, The snow-crowned peaks of the White Mountains gleamed like ghostly towers. Éomer's riders departed there, saluting the fellowship with words of honor and friendship. "You have given peace to our land once more," Éomer said, clasping Aragorn's forearm. "Should the shadow rise again, Rohan will answer your call." Aragorn inclined his head. "And I yours, son of Éomund. The bond between Gondor and Rohan shall never be broken while I yet live." With that they parted, and Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli turned their horses toward Edoras. There they were greeted with joy and wonder, for the tale of their deeds had already spread. The golden hall of Meduseld stood bright beneath the morning light, its roof of gilded tiles gleaming. King Theoden, though wearied by grief and years, rose from his high seat as they entered. "Welcome, sons of valor," he said, his voice carrying across the hall. "My heart rejoices to see you return in triumph, though fire and shadow followed you." Aragorn bowed low. "The fire is quenched, Lord, though its memory lingers. Saruman's craft shall trouble your land no more." Theoden's gaze lingered on him, as though he sensed the hidden burden Aragorn bore. "And yet I see in your eyes that your own trial is not done." "Not yet," Aragorn admitted softly, "but I will endure it, as all wounds of the body and spirit must be endured." That night a feast was held in their honor. Yet even as laughter filled the hall, and the minstrels sang of Helm's Deep and the riders' victory, Aragorn's mind wandered. The warmth of the hearth did not reach him. From time to time he felt the faint throb beneath his bandages, as though some ember yet stirred within him, unwilling to die. When at last the hall fell silent and the guests withdrew, Aragorn stood alone upon the terrace of Meduseld. The moon hung over the mountains, silver and distant. Legolas joined him there, his eyes bright with starlight. "You are restless," said the elf quietly. Aragorn nodded. "The fire is gone from the world, but not from me. The sword's touch lingers still. I feel it watching, waiting, as if it were not destroyed, only sleeping in the dark." Legolas was silent for a time. Then he said, "Such evil does not vanish utterly. The flame may have perished, yet its spirit clings to what remains of its making. You bore it too long, and it has left its mark. A mark I will bear until my death, if need be," Aragorn said. "Better I than the world." At dawn, they took leave of Theoden and set out once more, riding toward Gondor's borders. Messengers had come from Minas Tirith, bearing news that war stirred again in the east. Sauron's hosts were gathering beyond the Efelduath, and black banners had been seen along the river. The time of waiting was over. Their road led through the wide lands of Anorion, where the grass gave way to rocky slopes and old forests. The journey was quiet, save for the whisper of the wind through the trees and the distant rumble of thunder far to the south. On the fourth night they made camp beside a lake ringed with reeds. The surface was still as glass, reflecting the stars above. Aragorn sat apart, gazing into the water. His reflection wavered, pale, drawn, and marked by a faint red glow beneath his sleeve. When Legolas and Gimli slept, a strange sound broke the stillness. It was not the cry of bird or beast, but a low hiss, like breath drawn through teeth. Aragorn rose swiftly, hand upon Andúril. The sound came from the water's edge. The surface of the lake rippled, and a faint red light flickered beneath it. Shapes moved in the depths, long, shadowed, and serpentine. Then a voice, cold and whispering, reached his ears. "You cast me into the dark, Dúnedain, but fire does not die." Aragorn froze. The voice was soft, almost gentle, yet it carried the weight of molten stone. The mountain cannot hold me, the world remembers fire. And you, the voice faltered, replaced by a sound like crackling embers. Then silence. Aragorn knelt, staring into the still water. The reflection of the stars trembled. For a moment he thought he saw a glimmer of red far below. Then it vanished. When morning came, he said nothing of it, but his face was grave and his eyes turned often toward the south. By midday they reached the Anduin's wide waters. On the opposite shore rose the white gleam of the Ramas Echor, and beyond it the towers of Minas Tirith shone like stone flame against the dark sky. Smoke drifted faintly from the east, staining the horizon. Gimli gave a low whistle. A fair sight, though my heart foresees little rest within those walls. Aragorn's gaze lingered on the city. No rest indeed. The storm gathers and the time of the king draws near. As they crossed the river, the wind shifted. For an instant, Aragorn felt a warmth spread along his arm, the same searing pulse he had known when the flame had first touched him. He clenched his fist, jaw set. Legolas noticed the movement. The fire stirs again. It stirs because the shadow stirs, Aragorn replied. The powers of the world are waking for the final struggle. The flame of death was but a spark of what comes. They rode on, silent and grim. When at last they reached the white gates of Minas Tirith, the guards bowed low, for word of their deeds had spread. Yet the city itself seemed shrouded in foreboding. The people whispered of darkness in the east, of clouds that blotted the stars. That night, as Aragorn stood upon the walls and looked toward the dark plain beyond the mountains, he felt the wound upon his arm grow warm once more. It glowed faintly like the ember of a fire not yet extinguished. He raised his gaze to the heavens where the stars burned pure and cold. "Let it burn," he murmured. "So long as I live, its flame shall not pass into the world again." But far beyond Mordor's peaks, unseen by any mortal eye, a faint red light stirred in the depths of the earth, like the memory of a fire that refused to die. The days that followed were filled with tension, like the long breath before a storm. Minas Tirith stood white and silent beneath a sky of gathering clouds, its banners unmoving in the windless air. Messengers rode out daily toward the borders of Ithilien and the river, yet few returned, and those who did brought tidings of dread. Armies were stirring in Mordor. Fires had been seen upon the black plains, and the rumor of drums rolled from the east like distant thunder. Aragorn walked often upon the walls of the city, gazing toward that shadowed land. He wore no crown, nor did he yet claim the throne that was his by right, but all who looked upon him saw the bearing of a king. And Duril hung at his side, its silver light clear even under the dimming sun. Yet beneath the wrappings on his arm, the mark of the flame still burned faintly, a secret wound that bound him to the fire he had cast away. Legolas and Gimli lingered not idly either. The elf kept watch upon the skies, where dark wings sometimes passed far above the mountains, while the dwarf busied himself strengthening the city's lower gates and the hidden tunnels beneath the walls. But often they came together at night to sit beside their friend, who seemed more drawn into silence with each passing day. "The shadow lengthens," Gimli said one evening, staring into the brazier's coals, "and still no word from Frodo. If the ring is not destroyed, all our labor will be ashes." Aragorn's gaze did not move from the horizon. "The fate of the ring lies far from our reach," he said quietly. "Yet every fire that burns in Mordor calls to another. The flame of death was but one such echo. I fear its spirit is not wholly quenched. Legolas turned toward him, his fair brow furrowed. You sense it still? Yes, Aragorn said. It whispers at the edge of thought. When the east wind blows, I feel it stir. The forge beneath the mountains was not its end. It was a prison. And the strength that forged it does not sleep. None answered. The brazier's flame flickered, and for a moment its light seemed redder than before. Then it guttered out, leaving only the faint hiss of cooling embers. That night, Aragorn dreamed. He stood once more in the dark valley beneath Calanost, the ruined tower rising above him. The air was filled with smoke, and before him lay the anvil where Musgul had fallen. Upon it rested the sword, the flame of death, whole once more. Its surface pulsed with molten veins, and within its fire a face appeared, pale and proud, Saruman of many colors. You thought to cast away my work, said the voice, but the fire you fought is the fire that burns in every heart of men. You cannot destroy what you are. Aragorn tried to speak, but no sound came. The fire rose, wrapping around him, burning without heat, devouring his shadow. Then he woke, breathless, his arms searing with pain. When dawn came, he told no one of the dream, yet he ordered his horse saddled and rode out beyond the city walls, taking only Legolas with him. Together they passed through the Pelennor, where the fields lay gray under the overcast sky, and came to the banks of the Anduin. The great river moved slow and heavy, reflecting the iron clouds above. There is unrest in the water, said Legolas softly. The current runs strange, as though some weight presses upon its heart. Aragorn dismounted and knelt upon the bank. The pain in his arm throbbed stronger here. It stirs beneath the earth, he murmured. The fire seeks a path to the surface. If it finds one, the lands of Rohan and Gondor alike will burn. Then what would you do? Asked Legolas. I would find its source, Aragorn replied, standing. When the sword perished, its essence fled into the deep places. If that fire wakes again, it must be bound, or quenched forever. The elf's eyes shone with unease. And if it cannot be quenched, then I will give it no world to burn. They returned by nightfall, and on the following day Aragorn sought the counsel of Gandalf, who had come once more to the city. The wizard listened long and gravely as Aragorn spoke of his wound, of the voice in his dreams, and of the unease beneath the land. When he finished, Gandalf's face was shadowed. Your fears are not unfounded, the gray pilgrim said. Saruman's spirit lingers, though his body is gone. In his pride he wove his will into many things, words, stones, and fire. The flame of death may have perished, yet its seed remains, and it has found a vessel in you. Aragorn's eyes darkened. Then I am cursed? Not cursed, Gandalf said, but chosen. You cast down the weapon, and thus its fire turned to you, seeking a master it could not find. Such powers cling to strength. They feed upon it. You must resist its call, Aragorn, son of Arathorn, until the hour comes when all fires are tested. Aragorn bowed his head. That hour draws near, I think. Gandalf laid a hand upon his shoulder. It does, but remember this. No flame can master the heart that bears true light. When the darkness comes, hold to that, and you shall not fall. That night the winds from Mordor began to blow, bringing with them the smell of ash. The sun rose red the next morning, veiled in smoke. The drums of the east had begun to beat in earnest. Aragorn stood before the city gates. As the host of Gondor gathered upon the plain, Standard-bearers raised the white tree, and horns sounded from every level of Minas Tirith. Legolas and Gimli stood at his side, their faces grim. The wind tugged at his cloak, carrying faint whispers that only he could hear, crackling, murmuring, the voice of flame. You cannot flee what burns within. He placed his hand upon Anduril's hilt, and its cool light steadied him. No, he said aloud, but I can wield it. When the host marched forth toward the Morannon, Aragorn rode at its head. The banner of the king unfurled above him, and behind it followed men of Gondor, riders of Rohan, and many who had once thought the world lost. As they passed through the ruined gate and into the plains of shadow, the ground beneath them trembled, and from far away, deep in the earth, came the faint echo of a roar, like the awakening of some ancient fire. Gimli glanced toward him. Do you hear it? Aragorn's eyes were fixed upon the black horizon. I hear it, he said, and I will meet it. They rode on into the gathering dark, the flame upon Aragorn's arm burning like a hidden star, painful, perilous, but alive, and above the hosts of men the sky reddened as though the world itself awaited the meeting of fire and light. The march to the Black Gate was long and heavy beneath a sky that knew no dawn. The wind carried ash from Mordor's forges, and the land itself seemed to groan under the weight of that ancient evil. The host of the west moved like a river of silver and gold amid a sea of gray, banners of Rohan and Gondor rippling together above 1,000 helms. Though they went knowing their peril, no man faltered, for at their head rode Aragorn, the rightful heir of Isildur, his bearing calm as a mountain amid storm. By day they marched, by night they camped beneath the blackened stars, and though the soldiers spoke softly of courage, fear clung to their hearts. Tales spread among them, tales of strange fires flickering in the east, of shadows that burned red upon the horizon, and of a whisper that passed through the ranks like wind through reeds. Some said the mountains themselves had begun to glow from within, as if the very bones of the earth burned with hidden flame. Gimli muttered when he heard such talk. These folk see ghosts in every spark. We have beaten worse odds than whispers. But Legolas, ever watchful, answered gravely, There is fire in the east, though it bears no name we know. The air trembles with it. It may be that Saruman's craft has woken something that slumbered in the dark beneath. Aragorn said nothing, but that night he dreamt again. In his dream, he stood upon the plain before the Morannon, and out of the earth rose a column of flame. Within it he saw a sword, black and burning, and behind that sword, a face. No longer Saruman's, but something older, wreathed in molten gold and shadow. The voice that spoke was deep as stone breaking. You brought me forth, son of kings. Your blood opened the fire. Your will forged the path. You cannot turn from what you have kindled. When he woke, the camp lay in silence, save for the distant rumble of thunder. He touched his arm, and the wound burned bright beneath the bandage, its heat spreading through his veins. 3 days later, the host reached the desolate plain before the Black Gate. There the ground was cracked and smoking, and the sky hung low and red. The gate itself loomed vast and terrible, its iron jaws shut fast between towers crowned with fire. No living thing stirred, yet all felt the eyes of the dark land upon them. Gandalf rode to the forefront and raised his staff. Here we make our stand, he said. Let Mordor come. The armies of the west arrayed themselves upon the plain, Aragorn took his place before the banner of the White Tree, Legolas and Gimli at his sides. The wind from the east blew hot upon their faces, and with it came the faint sound of drums, deep, steady, and growing nearer. Then the ground shook. From the gate issued a host black as night, ranks upon ranks of orcs, trolls, and easterlings, bearing the red and gold of the eye. Their cries echoed like the clashing of iron. At their head rode a captain in armor the color of molten stone. His helm was shaped like a serpent's head, and in his hand he bore a sword wreathed in living fire. "The flame!" Gimli cried. "By Mahal's beard, it lives again." Aragorn's heart turned cold. The sword that Captain bore was no mere weapon. It was the flame of death reborn, forged anew in Mordor's furnaces. The fire that he had buried beneath the mountains had found its way back into the world, and its hunger was greater than before. The captain halted before them, and his voice rang across the plain. "Behold the gift of the East. The flame that was quenched is risen, and it shall devour all who stand before the eye." He raised the sword high, and its light bathed the land in red. The ground split open where it shone, and streams of molten rock flowed forth. Men staggered back in fear, and horses screamed. But Aragorn stepped forward, his voice clear and strong. "I am Aragorn, son of Arathorn, and heir to Isildur. By the blood of Númenor and the light of the west, I cast down your fire." He drew Andúril, and its white flames sprang forth, bright and pure. The two lights, one red, one silver, met upon the plain, and for a moment all the world seemed to hold its breath. Then the armies of Mordor roared and surged forward. Battle was joined. The crash of steel upon steel filled the air, mingled with the roar of beasts and the cries of men. Arrows hissed, spears splintered, and the ground shook beneath the tread of war. Aragorn fought at the forefront, Andúril cutting a path through shadow. The flame within his arm burned fiercer with each stroke, as though the power of the cursed sword sought to answer its twin. He met the captain amid the slaughter. Fire clashed with light, and the force of their meeting threw soldiers from their feet. The flame of death screamed like a living thing, its edge spitting sparks that scorched the earth. "You cannot destroy me," the captain roared. "I am fire eternal." "Then burn in your own flame," Aragorn answered. He struck hard, and their blades met again and again, until Andúril's white fire began to consume the red. The captain faltered, and for the first time fear showed in his molten eyes. But as Aragorn pressed his advantage, the mark upon his arm flared like a brand. Pain seared through him, and his strength wavered. The fire sought to claim him, to make him its vessel once more. He staggered, and the captain's sword struck his side, grazing his armor. From behind came Gimli's bellow, and the sharp whistle of an arrow. Legolas's shaft struck the captain's helm, and Gimli's axe split the creature's knee. With a cry, Aragorn rose once more and drove Andúril straight through the burning sword. There came a sound like thunder. The flame of death shattered, bursting into 1,000 sparks that rained upon the plain. The captain fell back, his armor crumbling into ash. For a moment all was silent save for the hiss of cooling stone. Then the hosts of Mordor faltered, and a great cheer rose from the men of the west. But Aragorn did not hear it. He stood unmoving, his hand still upon Andúril, his face pale as bone. Smoke curled from the wound upon his arm, and the air around him shimmered with heat. "Aragorn!" Legolas cried, rushing to him. "The fire!" The king's eyes opened, and within them burned a light fierce and terrible. "It is not gone," he said. It is within me now." Gandalf came swiftly to his side. "Hold fast, son of Arathorn. The fire cannot claim what is bound to hope." Aragorn's gaze turned eastward, to the mountains of Mordor. There, a red glow was rising, Mount Doom awake and blazing. "Then hope shall burn brighter still," he said, "for fire may be our enemy, yet it is also the forge of all things made new." He raised Andúril high, and its light flared white against the darkness. The armies of Mordor reeled, blinded by its brilliance, and the wind shifted westward, sweeping away the stench of ash. But deep within the land of shadow, the earth groaned, and a voice rose like the breath of the mountain itself, ancient, wrathful, unending. "You are fire, Dunedain, and all fire must feed." The battle still raged, yet all who looked upon Aragorn saw that a greater war was now begun, one not of swords, but of spirit, between the flame that devours and the flame that endures. Smoke veiled the plains before the Black Gate. The sun was a dim, blood-colored circle, and the air trembled with heat and the cries of the dying. The field had become a place of ruin, banners torn, armor blackened, the stench of burning heavy upon every breath. Yet amid that desolation, the men of the West still fought on, hearts lifted by the gleam of Andúril and the cry of their king. Aragorn stood like a tower of flame, his face pale but his eyes fierce with light. His wound burned as though molten iron flowed beneath his skin. The flame of death was shattered, yet its essence lived within him, wrestling with his spirit for dominion. Each time he struck with Andúril, a wave of fire surged through him, urging him toward rage, toward ruin. But still he held fast. "Hold the line," he cried. His voice rang across the chaos, clear and unbroken. "For Gondor, for the West!" Legolas's arrows flew swift beside him, and Gimli's axe rose and fell in a rhythm grim and sure. The warriors of Rohan formed ranks about the White Tree's banner, driving back the orcs that pressed upon them. Yet new foes poured from the gate. Trolls armored in iron and beasts from the dark lands beyond the Sea of Nirn. Gandalf's staff shone white amid the storm of shadow. Lightning burst from its tip, cleaving the air. The wizard's voice carried above the din, "Stand firm, the hour is at hand." Even as he spoke, a great tremor shook the plain. The ground split in many places, and from the cracks poured streams of red light. The heat of them was unbearable. Men cried out, covering their faces. "Mount Doom!" shouted Gimli. "It rouses!" Aragorn turned his gaze eastward. Beyond the ranks of Mordor, the great mountain flamed like the heart of the world. Pillars of fire rose into the dark sky, and thunder rolled across the plains. In that light he saw the shadows of great shapes moving, spirits of smoke and flame, half seen, half imagined. The earth itself seemed to awaken, as though a voice deeper than the mind of men called to him through the burning. "You cannot fight me, son of kings," the voice whispered in the wind. "I am the forge and the flame. I am what you are made of." Aragorn gripped Andúril with both hands. "If you are the fire," he answered through clenched teeth, "then I am the hand that wields it." The armies clashed once more, and the sky grew dark with smoke. The wind turned fierce, blowing eastward toward Mordor as if drawn by some vast breath. Gandalf spurred his horse to Aragorn's side. "It is begun," he cried. "Frodo approaches the fire. All the power of the enemy is bent upon this moment." Aragorn's eyes met his. "Then we must hold them, all of them, until the end." He raised his sword once more. "Elisar! Elisar!" The name carried through the ranks like a beacon. Men rallied to him, gathering their courage for one last charge. But even as they surged forward, the flame within Aragorn flared brighter. The light of Andúril turned almost red, mingling with the fire in his blood. The edges of the world blurred. He felt the power within him growing, terrible, intoxicating. He could burn them all, he knew. With a thought, he could sweep the armies of Mordor into ash. "Aragorn!" Legolas's voice reached him through the roar. "Master yourself!" The elf's words pierced the haze, and Aragorn staggered. He fell to one knee, pressing his hand to the earth. The ground beneath his palm glowed, smoking where his touch fell. The fire sought escape, clawing through his veins like a living thing. "You are mine," the voice within him hissed. "You carried my seed into the heart of men. You shall not cast me out." "No," he cried aloud, "you shall not master me." He drove Andúril's blade into the ground, and from its silver edge burst a blinding light. The earth trembled, and the fire that crawled through the soil drew back, as though in pain. The men near him shielded their eyes, and for a heartbeat, the air was clear again. Then came the great cry, the cry that all heard, though none could name its source. It was the voice of Sauron, vast and dreadful, ringing across the plain. "No!" The black gate shuddered, the towers of the Morannon cracked, and from the east rose a wind of ruin. The eye that burned in the heart of Mordor flared once more, then went dark. A silence followed, sudden and immense. Far away, on the very slopes of Mount Doom, the ring had met its fate. The fire that had lived since the world was young swallowed its maker, and the power of the Dark Lord was broken. But though the shadow passed from the land, Aragorn still knelt upon the plain, his breath shallow, his body trembling. The fire within him roared in defiance of the darkness that had died. The flame of death, orphaned now, sought a master, and found none. Gandalf knelt beside him, his hand upon the king's brow. "Let it go," he murmured. "The war is over. Let the flame die." Aragorn's eyes were closed, his face pale. "It will not die," he whispered. "It cannot. It is bound to life itself, but I can hold it." He rose slowly, unsteady but unbroken. The heat that had seared his arm now dimmed to a soft glow beneath his skin, no longer pain but presence. "It is part of me now," he said quietly. "The flame that devours has become the flame that guards." The sky began to clear. The smoke lifted from the mountains, revealing the red ruin of the dark land. The men of the west, weary and stunned, lifted their swords in triumph. The sound of their joy rolled across the plain like thunder breaking after a storm. Legolas came to Aragorn's side, his eyes bright with relief. "It is ended," he said. "The shadow is gone." Aragorn looked to the east one last time. "Yes," he said softly, "the shadow is gone, but fire will always remain." Gimli laughed wearily. "Aye, and so will dwarves, if there's stone left to stand on. Come, King of Gondor, there's work yet to do, and I'd rather face hammer and ale than flame and ruin." Aragorn smiled faintly. "So would I, my friend." They turned then toward the west, where the banners of Rohan and Gondor fluttered in the light of a new dawn. The war was ended, but in the secret places of his heart, Aragorn knew that the fire he bore would never wholly fade. It would burn quietly within him, a spark of both sorrow and strength, until the end of his days. As the sun rose over the plains of Mordor, its rays touched the broken gate, and for the first time in an age, light fell upon the blackened stones of that cursed land. The fire of the world still burned, but now it burned in the hearts of the free. The shadow was gone, yet silence lay over the plains of Gorgoroth, deep and strange after so great a tumult. The wind no longer burned, but whispered softly across the ash, carrying with it the smell of ruin and release. The black towers of the Morannon had fallen, and the hosts of Mordor, bereft of will, fled or perished. The dark land that had once trembled beneath the gaze of the eye now stood hollow and still. Aragorn stood upon the field of battle long after the cries of victory had faded. His cloak was torn, his face smeared with ash, but in his bearing there was calm. Around him the wounded were tended, and the living gathered their dead. Legolas moved among them with quiet grace, binding the hurts of men and elf alike, while Gimli, grim and weary, helped lift the broken shields of fallen comrades, muttering a blessing in the deep tongue of his people. When Gandalf at last approached, the king of Gondor turned to him with slow, measured breath. "It is done," he said softly, though his eyes still glowed faintly with that inner light. "It is done," Gandalf replied, gazing toward the east. "The fire of Sauron is quenched, but the earth will bear his scars until the end of time." His gaze fell upon Aragorn's arm. "And you, son of Arathorn, your fire yet burns." Aragorn drew back his sleeve. The mark was still there, dark against his skin, though its edges shimmered faintly like embers beneath clear water. "It does not pain me now," he said, "yet I feel it, waking when the wind blows from the mountains." "It will fade," said Gandalf, "but never wholly. Fire leaves its memory upon what it touches. You have mastered it, Aragorn. See that it does not master you in turn." "I will remember," said the king, and his eyes were steady. The days that followed were filled with the labor of the living. The armies of the West made camp upon the plain, and healers moved among the tents, binding wounds and gathering provisions for the journey home. Messengers rode forth to carry tidings to every realm, Rohan, Gondor, and the Shire, where none yet knew that their fate had been secured. Each evening, as the sun sank red behind the mountains, Aragorn walked alone to the edge of the ruin. He would stand long upon a ridge overlooking the smoldering valley, where fissures glowed faintly, and the air still shimmered with heat. Sometimes he thought he saw movement far below, streams of molten rock winding like veins through the bones of the world, a last whisper of the fire that had sought his soul. But when he blinked, it was gone. On the fourth day, Legolas came to him. "The men speak of leaving tomorrow," he said. "They long for the scent of grass and the sound of rivers." And Gimli mutters that he dreams of stone halls and good ale. Aragorn smiled faintly. "Then we ride with the dawn. Gondor awaits, and Rohan beside it. Let us bring them peace." When morning came, the host of the West turned its face from Mordor and began its slow march home. The land was gray and lifeless, yet as the days passed and the distance widened, the air grew lighter. The wind no longer carried the taste of ash. The men sang softly as they went, old songs of Gondor and Rohan, songs of return and remembrance. They crossed the great plain and came once more to the green fields of Ithilien, where the ruins of old watchtowers still stood. Here they rested for a time beneath the shade of budding trees. The war was over, yet its ghosts lingered in every heart. On a night when the moon hung high and the stars were bright, Aragorn sat apart beside a small fire. Its flames danced golden and gentle, untainted by shadow. He stared into them for a long while, and for the first time since the battle, he felt peace. Legolas joined him silently, sitting opposite the flame. For a while neither spoke. Then the elf said, "The fire no longer troubles you." "No," Aragorn replied. "It abides, but it no longer burns. I think it waits." "For what?" "For the world to need it again," he said. "Fire destroys, but it also purifies. Without it the forge grows cold." He looked up, his eyes distant. "Perhaps that is the task of kings, to bear what others cannot, to hold flame without letting it consume." Legolas studied him with quiet wonder. "Then the world is safe in your hands, Elisar." Aragorn smiled. "For a while, perhaps, but even kings are but stewards of their age." When morning broke, they rode once more, passing through the green vales that led toward Osgiliath, where the white ruins shone faintly beneath the sun. Gondor awaited them with open gates and banners streaming. The people lined the roads, cheering as the returning host approached, and flowers were strewn before the hooves of their horses. Yet though joy filled the city, Aragorn's gaze wandered often to the east, where a faint haze still marked the line of the horizon. He knew that peace was a fragile thing, like the stillness after a storm. Fire could sleep, but it never forgot. When night fell upon Minas Tirith, the king stood upon the high walls and looked down upon the lamplit streets below. The white tree shone faintly in the court, its blossoms silver beneath the stars. He placed a hand upon the cold stone and whispered, "The flame endures, but so does light." Then he turned and descended to the Hall of the Kings, where Gandalf waited beside the great throne. "You are troubled," the wizard said. "Not troubled," Aragorn answered, "only mindful. The fire that once sought to devour me now lies quiet, but I feel it sometimes, like the echo of a heartbeat beneath the world. Perhaps it is not evil that lingers, but a reminder of what power is and how it must be kept in check." Gandalf nodded. "So long as memory endures, wisdom follows. The greatest danger lies not in fire itself, but in forgetting that it burns." They spoke no more after that, for words seemed small beside what had passed. The war was ended, the realm was free, and dawn would bring the crowning of a king. When at last Aragorn retired to his chamber, he unbound his arm and looked upon the mark. It had faded now to a faint scar, no brighter than the shimmer of old embers. Yet when he held a candle near, the light caught in it, and it gleamed softly like the memory of flame seen through tears. He closed his hand over it and whispered, "Be still." And for the first time in many months, the wound obeyed. Outside, the wind carried the scent of spring from the fields below. Bells rang from the lower city, and the stars burned pure and cold over the white mountains. Aragorn lay down to rest, and in his dreams there was no fire, only the sound of rivers, the whisper of leaves, and the far-off song of the sea. Yet in the deep places of the world, far below stone and soil, something stirred, a faint glow moving through the dark, slow as breath, patient as time. It was not evil, nor yet good, but the remnant of all that had burned. And thus the flame of death passed from tale into legend, leaving behind only a scar upon the heart of the world and upon the hand of the king who had conquered it. Morning came soft over the towers of Minas Tirith, gilding the stone with pale gold. Bells rang clear from every level of the city, their sound carrying through the still air to the green fields beyond the Ramas. Gondor had awakened to her new age. The banners of the white tree rippled upon the citadel, and beneath them the people gathered bright in their festal robes, for the day of the king's coronation had come at last. Aragorn rose before dawn. He stood long before the narrow window of his chamber, looking eastward where the shadow once lay. The sky there was washed clean now, pale and quiet, as if the heavens themselves had forgotten the smoke of war. Yet within him something remained, a small, steady warmth that never faded. The mark upon his arm had dimmed to a faint trace, but when he drew breath, he could feel it pulsing with the rhythm of his heart. He turned as Gandalf entered, robed in white and bearing a circlet of silver in his hands. The wizard's eyes were kind but grave, for he too knew that even peace bore its burden. "It is time," Gandalf said softly. "The realm awaits its king." "So long have I walked beneath many names," Aragorn replied, "that I scarce remember the sound of mine own. But today I will take it again, not for pride, but for the keeping of what has been won." Together they passed through the great doors into the court of the fountain. The white tree shimmered in bloom beside the rising sun, and a hush fell upon the throng. The banners of the realms stirred gently, the green horse of Rohan, the swan of Dol Amroth, the silver stars of the north. Then Gandalf lifted his voice. "Here is Aragorn, son of Arathorn, chieftain of the Dunedain of Arnor, bearer of the sword reforged, and heir to the thrones of Gondor and Arnor united. Will you now take the crown of your fathers?" Aragorn knelt. The wind touched his hair, and the morning light fell full upon his face. "By the labor and blood of the free peoples is this realm restored," he said. "I will take the crown not as a lord of conquest, but as a steward of hope." Gandalf placed the circlet upon his brow. "Now come the days of the king, and may they be blessed while the thrones of the Valar endure." The people fell to their knees, and the sound of their voices rose like a tide. Horns rang from every wall, and the mountains flung back the echo in triumph. Yet amid that joy, Aragorn felt the faint stirring beneath his skin, the memory of the flame of death. It did not burn in defiance now, but flickered gently, as if acknowledging his vow. "Guard the fire, do not wield it," the voice of memory whispered, and he bowed his head in silent assent. Later, when the feast had passed and the laughter of the city grew softer with twilight, Aragorn walked alone through the gardens of the citadel. The air smelled of new blossom and fresh rain upon the stones. He came at last to the wall that looked west toward the sea, where the stars had begun to kindle. Legolas found him there, and beside the elf walked Gimli, his beard newly braided for the day's honor. "You stand silent while the whole realm sings," Gimli said, half in jest. "Are kings not meant to revel in their own glory?" Aragorn smiled faintly. "A king's glory lies not in songs, my friend, but in the keeping of peace. And peace is a fragile thing." Legolas studied him. "Your heart is troubled still." Aragorn lifted his hand, showing the faint scar that glimmered in the starlight. "The flame lingers, though now it does not wound. It waits, perhaps, for the day it will be needed again. But I would not call it back. Let it sleep. The fire that once burned to destroy may yet warm to heal," said Legolas. "Even flame can serve when guided by wisdom." "And by iron," Gimli added, tapping the head of his axe. "Though I'd rather keep my smithing in the forges of Aglarond than in the hearts of men." Aragorn laughed softly. "Aye, Master Dwarf, your counsel is sound as stone." They stood together for a while, watching as the stars multiplied above the darkening land. The city below gleamed with countless lights, and the people's joy rose faintly like a song carried by the wind. When at last they parted, Aragorn remained. He laid a hand upon the cold marble of the wall and closed his eyes. In that quiet moment, he thought of the long road behind him, of the fire-lit plains of Rohan, the towers of Orthanc, the deep shadows of Mordor, and the friends who had walked beside him through all. He thought too of Frodo and Sam, of their small courage that had unmade the mightiest power in Middle-earth. Their burden had been greater than his, and their fire brighter for its humility. He bowed his head. "All things endure through small hands," he murmured. "May this flame I bear remain small enough to serve, not to rule." The wind shifted, bringing with it the faint murmur of the Anduin far below. The river caught the starlight and bore it westward, toward the sea and the undying lands beyond. For a moment, Aragorn felt as though the world itself breathed anew. When he turned back to the citadel, the moon had risen. Upon the flagstones of the court of the fountain, he saw his own shadow, mingled with the light of the white tree, and for the first time since the war, he felt wholly at peace. In the days that followed, the realm was set in order. Messengers rode to every corner of the land. The broken watchtowers of the north were rebuilt, and the Greenway saw travelers once more. Peace took root, like grass after rain, yet tales of fire still clung to the edges of the world, of strange lights beneath the mountains, and warmth that lingered in the stones of Calanost, where the flame had first been forged. Aragorn heard these tales, but spoke little of them. Only once did he ride alone to those far northern hills, standing amid the ruins where it had all begun. The land there was quiet now, the barrows covered with wildflowers. No heat rose from the ground. He knelt and laid his hand upon the earth. "Sleep, old fire," he said. "Your time has passed." As he stood, a gentle wind rose from the south, stirring his cloak. In that moment he fancied he heard laughter faint and distant, as of sparks falling into rain. He smiled, then turned his horse toward home. When he came again to Minas Tirith, the years were beginning to grow golden, and his people called him Elisar, the Healer, the Flame of the West, not for the fire he bore, but for the light he had kindled in their hearts. Thus ended the tale of the Flame of Death, and in its place was written a tale of life, of renewal, and of the king who held fire without letting it consume. Years passed, and the realm of Gondor prospered beneath the reign of Elisar the king. The scars of war faded, grass grew again upon the fields of Pelennor, and white ships sailed freely along the Anduin, their sails bright against the morning sun. Peace returned to Middle-earth, deep and long as a summer's breath. Yet even in those quiet years, the memory of fire was never wholly gone. Aragorn walked often among his people, clad not in crown or mail, but in simple gray, for he loved to know the hearts of those he ruled. In the markets of the city he was called simply the Tall Captain, and many who met his gaze felt warmth and calm, as though the light of a hearth touched them unseen. Still, when he was alone, he felt it, the faint pulse beneath his scar, the quiet echo of the flame of death that once burned so fiercely within him. Some nights he would wake and walk to the window, looking eastward across the dark plain where the black land had lain. There was green there now, grass creeping over ash, and small fires gleamed in the cottages of settlers who had come to till the soil. Yet in the deepest hours before dawn, when the wind rose from the mountains, he thought he could hear the whisper of flame far below, in the bones of the world. Arwen Undomiel, his queen, knew this restlessness, though he seldom spoke of it. One night, as they stood together upon the high terrace of the citadel, she laid her hand upon his arm and said, "Your heart is not at ease." Aragorn smiled faintly. "Peace sits lightly upon me, it seems. I thought the fire quenched, yet still it breathes when the world sleeps." "Fire is life, Estelle," she said softly. "Even the green things draw strength from its warmth. Do not fear what remains. It is but the memory of your own courage." He turned to her, and for a time no words passed between them. The moonlight shone upon her hair, and in her eyes he saw not shadow but stars. "If you speak so, my heart finds rest," he said at last, "for you are the cool of the night after the storm." So the days of the king continued, and the seasons turned. The white tree flourished in the court, its blossoms gleaming like silver fire against the sky. The realm grew rich and wide. The lands of the north were reclaimed, and the Dunedain returned to their watch. Children were born who knew nothing of Sauron's darkness, and the tales of old wars became legend whispered by firesides. Yet there came a spring unlike any other. The winter snows melted early, and the mountains sent strange tremors through the earth. Rivers ran higher than their bounds, and shepherds in the foothills spoke of warmth rising from the deep rocks of mists that glowed faintly at night. When word reached Minas Tirith, Aragorn rode forth with a small company to learn the truth of it. They passed through Ithilien, now green and fair, and came to the feet of the White Mountains. There, in a narrow vale not far from the Dimholt road, the air shimmered with heat, though the sun was mild. Smoke rose from fissures in the earth, and the scent of sulfur filled the wind. "This was not so in my father's day," said one of the guards uneasily. "The mountain stirs." Aragorn dismounted and knelt upon the rocky ground. The stone was warm beneath his hand, too warm for comfort. Deep below, he felt a thrum, like the heartbeat of some sleeping giant. His scar burned faintly in answer. "It wakes," he murmured. "The same fire that once sought to rule. The hearts of men still moves beneath the world. Saruman's craft may be gone, but the flame he stole was older than his pride. It belongs to the earth itself." Legolas, who had come with him, stood watching the faint red glow in the fissures. "Will it rise again?" he asked. Aragorn shook his head. "No, the fire is bound to the life of the world. It cannot rise without destroying all, and it will not. It has learned patience as I have. It sleeps, and through it, perhaps the land is healed." He took from his pouch a small crystal vial, clear as mountain ice, within which shimmered a pale light. "The phial of Galadriel," he said. "Its light once drove back darkness. Perhaps it will soothe fire as well." He unstoppered it and poured a few drops upon the ground. The light sank into the stone, and at once the heat faded. The smoke cleared, leaving only a faint warmth like that of spring sunlight. Gimli, who had been silent till then, grunted in approval. "A fair trick, that. If every mountain could be tamed so gently, I'd sleep sounder in my halls." Aragorn smiled. "No trick, my friend, only grace. Fire answers to light, not to force. We are its keepers, not its masters." They lingered there until the wind turned cool again, and then they rode home. Word spread swiftly that the king had quieted the trembling of the mountains, and the people rejoiced anew. But Aragorn said little of what had passed. That summer was long and bright. The fields of Gondor ripened in plenty, and the harvest songs echoed from vale to vale. Yet even in peace, the king kept watch. Each year, on the day when the war had ended, he climbed alone to the high wall of the city and looked east. There he would stand until the stars came, remembering the fire that had burned and the lives it had claimed, and giving thanks for those it had spared. As years deepened into decades, age came upon him gently, like twilight over the hills. His hair turned silver, his strength mellowed, but his eyes never lost their light. The scar upon his arm faded until only he could feel it, a warmth that pulsed softly beneath the skin, as though his heart had learned to echo the rhythm of the world. One night, when the moon was thin and the wind carried the scent of autumn, Aragorn called for his son. Eldarion came swiftly to his side, tall and strong, his gaze bright with the wisdom of both men and elves. "My time draws near," said the king. "Soon the world will pass to your keeping. Remember this, my son. Power is as fire. It warms, but it devours if left unguarded. Bear it with humility, and it shall serve you well." Eldarion bowed his head. "Father, I will remember." Aragorn smiled. "Then the flame will never die, for it shall dwell not in swords or crowns, but in the hearts of those who serve with love." When dawn came, the bells of the city rang soft and solemn, and all who looked to the white tower saw light upon its highest windows, a light like the first fire of morning. Thus passed Aragorn Elisar, Flame of the West, last of the Dúnedain kings, and though his body lay at rest in the House of Kings, the warmth of his spirit remained. Even now, when the wind sweeps over the Pelennor and the fields of Gondor shimmer in the sun, the people say they feel a breath of heat upon the air, not harsh, but gentle, like the touch of a hearth. They call it the King's Fire, the living ember of hope that endures as long as the white tree blooms and men remember the name of Aragorn, who bore the flame of death and turned it to life. And in the far deeps of the world, beneath mountain and sea, the old fire sleeps still, quiet, waiting, dreaming not of conquest, but of light. For the fire that once burned to destroy now warms the heart of the world, and the tale of its keeper is told wherever men kindle flame against the dark.